We are just 65 days until the Republican National Convention when that comes to Jacksonville. Tonight we're learning more about the 32-member host committee. You've got 29 men, 3 women that will play a role in the event, a big role indeed. Tonight on Your Side's Alex Ositis spoke with one of the Florida state leaders named to the committee about what we can expect.
Some of the highest-ranking Republican officials in the state, members of the city's business community, as well as a religious leader, all find themselves connected with the convention about 2 months away. A quick breakdown of who's who. The committee, co-chaired by Mayor Lenny Curry and lobbyist Brian Ballard, who was the chairman of Trump Victory in 2016, Congressman John Rutherford and Colonel Michael Waltz, followed by a delegation of Florida representatives and senators, including the incoming Senate President Wilton Simpson, who spoke with us via Zoom Friday.
It's going to highlight the state of Florida. It's going to let people from around the world see that we are back open for business. And we can do that in a safe and responsible fashion.
Simpson is joined by nearly a dozen business leaders with local, state, and even national ties. Former Florida Attorney General and one of 3 women on the committee, Pam Bondi, as well as a medical doctor, Leon Haley Jr., and the Potter's House Ministries Bishop Vaughn McLaughlin, and more. Simpson says when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic and protocols, he trusts the committee will lean on the side of safety to ensure the convention goes on.
Things that will be necessary, and I think that'll be the main focus. And again, I think it's a great honor.
Still ahead at 6, one of the key jobs of this committee includes financing. I'll explain coming up. Reporting, Alex Ositis, First Coast News, on your side.